Let's go.
Welcome to the Insights brought to you by AKPK, Financial Education and Wellbeing Research Centre, FEWRC. I am your host, Naila Huda, and today's episode is titled Building Retirement Mindsets. Are we there yet? Retirement, once a distant finish line, is becoming an urgent reality for Malaysians. In less than 20 years, our society will transition from aging to aged, with life expectancy rising to 74.8 years and fertility rates dropping to just 1.7 births per person. And these shifts are already having real consequences. Half of EPF members exhaust their retirement savings within 5 years, and many elderly households struggle with absolute poverty. But at the same time, the way we live and work is evolving rapidly as well. The gig economy, entrepreneurship, career breaks, and multi-stage life paths are reshaping how people plan for the future. Life is no longer linear, and neither is retirement. In this episode, we'll unpack what it really takes to build a retirement mindset that works, not just for us today, but for generations to come. Are we ready for the challenges of an aging society? Let's find out. But before we dive in, let's hear from our colleague Rushida, who will share some insights on today's topic.
Thank you, Naila. When it comes to retirement readiness, the gap between needs and reality is striking. An article by AKPK estimates that a Malaysian needs around 600,000 ringgit to retire comfortably. Yet, almost 70% of EPF members at age 54 have savings of less than 50,000 ringgit. That's barely enough to last a few years, let alone 2 decades of retirement. As of 2024, 6.7 million EPF members have less than 10,000 ringgit in their accounts, effectively placing them at risk of financial insecurity in old age. The bigger picture is just as concerning. Household debt in Malaysia reached 84.2% of GDP by Q4 of 2023, meaning families enter retirement not only with limited savings but also with debt burdens that reduce their capacity to cope. And here's a sobering thought. According to AKPK's Financial Behaviour and State of Financial Wellbeing report, only 29% of Malaysians consider themselves financially resilient, meaning that the majority would struggle to sustain themselves if retirement came earlier than expected. These figures show that retirement readiness is no longer just a personal issue. It's a systemic one. The gap between savings and needs is widening, creating fiscal pressures on government, social security institutions, and even families themselves. As Malaysia enters the era of an aged nation, the challenge goes far beyond individual savings. It is about building a stronger ecosystem where policies, financial institutions, and innovative models work together to safeguard our retirees. To put simply, without stronger financial literacy, better retirement planning, and the right support in place, too many Malaysians risk facing not just old age, but old age without dignity or security. That is all for me. Back to you, Naila.
All right, thank you so much, Rushida, for that insightful sharing. And now, joining us today is a very special guest with over 20 years of experience in economic policy making, capital market policies, business planning, and process re-engineering. During her tenure at the Strategy and Research Department of the Securities Commission, she led research to facilitate economic and capital market policy making, managed the SC's strategic business planning process, and headed the management of the Capital Market Development Fund. She currently serves as Associate Director of Research Development at the Institute for Capital Market Malaysia. Please join me in welcoming Datin Aida Jaslina Jalaludin. Thank you so much for joining us today on The Insights. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's we're very pleased to have you today to talk about this very pressing matter. But to start off, I guess we want to get a sort of bigger picture, the general idea of about retirement. And so if we look at one of the key elements of retirement, when we talk about retirement, right, the policies and the planning that are in place, from your perspective, what do you think, or which perhaps demographic trends should policymakers focus on to understand the future social and economic landscape in Malaysia? It tells us a lot about what's going to happen in the future, right?
I think that's a very major signpost. I mean, we were looking at your social and economic landscape. What you really need to look at is the demographic shift. And this is something that's not just happening in Malaysia, but obviously worldwide. But when we look at it, I think what's important is you need to look at data from very different perspectives, and you need to look at it holistically to get a proper view of the whole situation. But it's not only about looking at data in isolation, you need to look at this data benchmarked against other countries, because that sets the context of where Malaysia is vis-a-vis other places. If you look, I think if you take a step back, what is important is you've got to look at it from three key perspectives, in my view, actually. One is looking at the population growth and size, and it's not just about fertility rates. We also have to look at the whole dynamic of the family structure. Today, you see people are getting married a lot later. People are having a lot less kids. Some are not even getting married. So this whole structure is changing, and that's important for us to forecast where population growth will be moving forward. That's on the population side. I think the next key thing that you need to look at is the labor force dynamics. What kind of jobs are being created? Who is getting into the labor force? Dulu, it was very clear. Everyone who went to school, you went to college, and then you got a job. That's no longer the case. People are taking what we call multi-stage life. So you know, it's not just studying, work, and then people take breaks in between. They go into work. Some are doing contract work as opposed. Right? So things change, and I think that's important. So that level of participation is something we need to look at. We need to look at wages. Has there been growth in wages, and that's critical. We also need to look at retirement ages. I think Malaysia's retirement age is now 60. A lot of countries have moved up to 65 already. So is that something we're going to have to look at? And of course, the question that you talked about, the social security coverage. Are we ready for retirement? So you have to look at population growth, you look at labor force dynamics, and I think one key area that a lot of people may not be looking at is health trends. So yes, we're living longer, but are we living a quality life longer? And that's really critical. So your non-communicable diseases, you've got to look at your infrastructure, your health infrastructure. Are we ready to take on more people in the hospitals if need be? So I think when you look at these three factors, then you sort of get a better understanding of the social economic landscape. And then only you can start to think about the policies that need to be crafted to sort of prepare us for this kind of landscape.
You mentioned a few things there, like the retirement age and where Malaysia is vis-a-vis other countries. So if we were to look across the region, just regionally, right, how does Malaysia's current fertility rate, and also looking at life expectancy, how do these rates sort of compare to other countries that are also undergoing similar demographic changes? Where do we stand?
I think that's a very interesting point. Normally, people say the good fertility rate or replacement rate is 2.1. So it means you're replacing your population. Malaysia was at 2.1 in 2010, but we've actually come down quite a bit. We're now at 1.7, so we're way below what is called the traditional good replacement rate. And globally, replacement rates are still about 2.2, but a lot of ASEAN countries are below that. And in fact, South Korea, if I may just quote, is at 0.74, and that's made the government very alert about it. So they're re-looking at the whole social demographics. They're looking at your work-life balance, you're looking at childcare, and I think this is something Malaysia will have to start looking at as our as our fertility rates fall. So that's one big area. Life expectancy, Malaysia was at 74 years in 2010. We're now at 75.2. So people are living longer. And I think with that, what we notice is that Malaysia will now move from an aging society to an age society in just 20 years, and then to a super age society by 2056. So we've got to also plan for that kind of conundrum. Singapore and Thailand are going to be super age even earlier by 2030. So I think in that perspective, this is where these issues need to come to the forefront of policy making, and we have to start thinking, what do we do with all these numbers that are coming in?
As you said, I think one interesting data is you pointed out the life expectancy increasing in Malaysia. But going back to what you said, right, people are living longer, but are they living better? Are they living a quality life during this lifespan? Is there any data, are there numbers to sort of prove this? Is it
I
down
think
to
this is
income?
something that's the government is now aware of and in looking at, but I don't think we've been tracking this very well. I think we've always tracked life expectancy, but not the quality of that life expectancy. So that's a very good point, and this is an area we should start focusing on. And as I said, it will have an impact on our healthcare infrastructure, healthcare costs, and obviously after that, the impact on the government's coffers in terms of spending in the health area.
Has that been that sort of mindset shift about looking at that quality of life, and do you think it's happening fast enough maybe?
I think there is a shift. People are talking about it. I remember, if you look at when insurance premiums went up, everybody was up in arms. So people are thinking, people are realizing how expensive health costs is. But I think the shift is not fast enough. And that's something that we will have to address. We do have time, but if we don't do it today, it's going to take a long time before we repair the situation.
All right. Of course, plenty more we'd like to unpack. That's just sort of scratching the surface, right? We will take a short break and we'll be interrogating you even more and trying to get even more data out of you. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back on the Insights shortly.
Let's go. Let's go.
Welcome back to The Insights, brought to you by AKPK Financial Education and Wellbeing Research Centre, FEWRC. In the previous segment, we've already covered the landscape and key demographic trends in relation to ageing. But now, looking specifically at Malaysia's ageing population. Still with me, Aida, thank you so much. But we want to look at, I guess, some of the key challenges that Malaysia is already facing perhaps and will face as we transition, as we said, from an aging to an aged society within, I believe, in the next 2 decades perhaps.
Right.
So what are the challenges that we can perhaps prepare for?
Okay, I think first and foremost it's important for us to understand Malaysia is moving, as you said, to an aging nation, aged nation by 2044, and that's just less than 2 decades away. Now that's a very fast time for a change from such a big demographic shift in 20 years. Some other countries have done it. Japan went through it in about 20 years, but you must understand when Japan did it, they were at a much more developed stage, which means that they had a lot more technology and support to help them facilitate.
Sort of cushion the effect.
Cushion the effect. So I think that's the first issue. We're going to go through it in a very fast pace, and we're still sort of developing in that sense, so we don't have all the cushions in place. Secondly, I think when we did our report looking at building financial security, the report that was just launched earlier this year, one of the key things we realize is you've got to look at it also from a personal level. This shift in demographics will have a toll on each and every one of us personally. First and foremost, this thing that people are talking about, sandwich generation. And I think, alhamdulillah, my parents are still around and they're living much longer. But I also have my little family and my little kids, which means then I have to balance my parents, my working life, and my kids. And this is exactly the kind of personal toll that a lot of people feel. I'm very lucky that I have a good support system behind me to manage that, exactly. But not everyone has that. And this is a big cause of stress for a lot of people.
For sure.
So the sandwich generation, the family structure makes a big difference, and that's at a personal level. Also, I think you mentioned earlier, I think about 50% of people sort of finish their EPF 5 years after retiring. Now, if you're living another 20 years, 5 years, you've still got 15 years without any financial security. So can you imagine the stresses that comes about? So at a personal level, you've got the sandwich generation issue, you've got the lack of savings. That's as a personal level. When you sort of put that all together, or what we call micros multiplied, you can imagine how that affects the nation as well. So that's one big area. And I think also with lower fertility rates, obviously you can have a smaller labor force coming in. Smaller labor force normally means less productivity. Could translate to less government revenue or taxes, and it also might have an impact on your overall GDP growth. So that might be a slowing down at GDP at that side. Coupled with, on the other side, you have longer life expectancy, which means you need better healthcare infrastructure, probably retirement homes, so infrastructure costs will go up. That means more government spending. So the government's going to be caught in this conundrum where they may be getting less revenue from the working population, but having to spend a lot more to assist those who are staying longer, so with longer lifespans. So this is that conundrum that they've got to manage. And I think this is something that people talk a lot about, the challenges both at a personal level as well as a national level. But I think what we did in our report is we looked at the demographic shift and realized actually there is an opportunity behind all these challenges, but a silver opportunity. And that silver opportunity actually translates to what people are calling the silver economy. And this is a particular economy that serves those who are living longer. And the kind of spending that they have is very different. So they will probably want better healthcare. They probably want devices in terms of, I suppose, fall detection and things like that. So that whole segment in Malaysia is expected to be about USD 946 billion by 2050. So actually there's a lot of opportunity. Not many players are in it at the moment in this particular space, so we need to help these players grow and, I suppose, catalyze that kind of momentum that there is there. Over and above that, Malaysia is actually in a very sweet spot, well, in a position of advantage at the moment. We have what we call positive demographic dividends, where the number of, the working population is still larger than the number of dependents.
Right.
Unfortunately, we only have a 2-year window, because that is going to end in 2027. So policymakers have a lot of stress to sort of think about how do we manage or how do we leverage on this 2-year window that we have to manage all the other challenges that will come later on. So I think what I'm trying to say is the demographic shifts brings along a lot of challenges, but there are opportunities, and it's really a critical time for Malaysia in the next 2 years to try and manage between the two and put in very forward-looking policies to handle these issues.
That's quite a time crunch.
It is.
Yeah,
it
not a
is.
lot of
2
time on
years
our
goes
side.
by very quickly.
You talk about a lot about the personal toll that this sandwich generation has on society. You talk about the toll that it will have on the national government as well. But perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on the financial or the fiscal burdens this will have on both government and society when we move from an aging to an aged society. And perhaps could we predict the future or what's to come in Malaysia based on what's happened in other societies as well?
Well, I think if I take a step back, it really depends on the kind of policies we put in place. So, as I mentioned, there's going to be a lot of strain on the government as well as on society with this demographic shift. But I think if we've got the policies in place, that should minimize that kind of burdens that are coming across. And countries like Japan have managed to sort of cushion it. Countries like Norway and things like that. So it is not a doomsday scenario, but we do need to get our act together. We do need to put in the right building blocks to manage this transition.
Yeah, and you also did talk about not just the emotional and the personal toll, but the financial toll on families, right? So moving away from the sort of government and national fiscal burden sort of framework, we want to look at the more individual and family level. When we talk about retirement savings, with half of EPF members depleting their savings in just 5 years, how do you interpret this data? I mean, these are big numbers, but this has a real effect on families, on people like us. What does this imply for the country's social security system as well?
Yeah, I think that's something that's quite worrying. I think EPF has been run very, very well. It manages about 1.3 trillion ringgit, and it's been given very good dividends across the years. But what is worrying is that, as you mentioned, 50% of people actually finish their retirement savings in 5 years. So this is actually a structural issue, and I think I will unpeg it from two perspectives. One, I think the first real issue is people don't really have that much savings in EPF in the first place. EPF has come out to say about 65% of their contributors don't even meet the minimum retirement amount of RM 290,000 by the time they retire. So, that's your minimum retirement amount, and if you haven't met that, obviously you won't have enough to stretch you for the next 20 years of retirement. So that's one key area. And why is that? I think we've got to be very frank. There has been slow wage growth in Malaysia. Cost of living is going up in Malaysia. But also I think savings is a very personal thing, and I think this is why when ICMR did a lot of its interviews and research, we looked at the behavioral aspects. And what we did is we came up with this persona called Amy, which is in the report. Now, it's a fictional persona, but it's based on all the feedback that we've got from interviews.
Right.
And what happens is when someone starts work, or Amy starts work, she's so inundated with all the things she has to do at the office, taking care of the kids, that retirement is the last thing on her mind. So present bias, which is a psychological thing that happens, you think about what you need to do today. Retirement, that's far away, so I'm not thinking about that. So that present bias hits in. You fast forward a couple more years, in her late 30s, early 40s, she starts realizing, I've got to start thinking about retirement. But by that stage, she's overwhelmed with the amount of choices. Do I do an EPF? Do I do ASB? Do I do a stash away? There's just so many options. And again, I think when you have so much choices, you sort of get a paralysis by analysis, and you sort of say, I don't do anything at all.
Yeah, I'm there right now. I'm Amy.
And I think that's quite common. So while, as I say, Amy is a fictional character, thank you for just...
We're all a little bit Amy,
Yeah, so I think with that, this is why when we look at policies, we can't do a one-size-fit-all. We have to understand. I mean, when I was in university, we always talked about the rational investor, the rational consumer. Unfortunately, that's not quite true. Behavioral economics has shown us that people do behave in certain ways due to present bias, due to choice overload, scarcity mindset. So that does affect the way you make your decisions. And I think that has not been filtered into policy making. So that's one big area. So we need to focus a lot more on financial planning. And financial planning has to start not when you're 40, you actually has to start when you're young, so that the minute you get into the workforce, you've got to start thinking about retirement and everything else. So that's one big area, I would think. The other thing is for those who do meet their retirement savings, I think a big problem also is when you hit 55, you go to EPF and you do a lump sum withdrawal. It has this whole lottery effect. You have 240,000 or 29,000. You feel very well off, and you think, I'm going to spend on a couple of things. And what you realize is actually 20 years is a long time. So that's that lottery effect that we also have to manage. I think the government has talked about making sure we have annuities, but I think public are not open to it. And again, here's a lack of financial understanding why annuities are important, that you get it monthly rather than lump sum.
Right.
But to be also fair, we've did a lot of interviews with retirees and pre-retirees, and a lot of people actually, because of the sandwich generation, once they retire, still have to carry on helping their children. And so they have that, I suppose, responsibilities as well, and that quickly eats into your cash flows and things like that.
In that sense, my parents are also Amy. They also still have to take care of me,
So you see, it's common. And I think AKPK also did a study which looked at financial abuse among elderly. So they're also very susceptible to scams and things like that. So all these factors put together make them also vulnerable. So while you think, I've got a good savings pool in EPF, you're vulnerable on a lot of accounts if you haven't sort of managed this whole process. So I think that's why this structural issues need to be addressed. It's not only about making sure people have more savings, but once they do have the savings, how they manage it for the next 20 to 25 years, especially if life expectancy is going to go up to 80, even more you have to stretch your dollar, so to say.
You shared a lot of interesting data based on the survey that you did with retirees. Are there perhaps any data that suggests, like you said, there might be some irresponsible spending, we get this sort of cash and we decide to treat ourselves and reward ourselves, right? Is there any data to suggest that that's where their retirement savings go, that there is a sort of a portion of retirees that are a little bit irresponsible in their spending, perhaps?
I would say anecdotally, I wouldn't say irresponsible, but I think, if you've been working 30 years, you've been saving that money, when you do get it, you do feel the need to, sometimes pay for your children's wedding. That's the time you want to go for your Umrah or your Hajj. So it's not irresponsible, but there are big ticket items that you may not have sort of factored in, because now your savings has to last a lot longer. So in our interviews, they did say these are the things they spend on, and sometimes renovation. So on the surface, you think, that's a waste of money. Why are you renovating at this age? But that's because their children come back to live with them, and then they have their grandchildren with them. So they're not in a position, the children or grandchildren are not in a position to spend that kind of money. So you, the parent, sort of does it because you've got your lump sum withdrawal. So there are a lot of these factors that people may not have sort of figured out earlier on in life. They think, I'm going to have this big lump sum, but you don't realize there's going to be all these stresses that come in with it later.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that these sort of financial decisions, there's a lot of socio-cultural context, of course, that goes into it. Exactly. But do you think there's still this gap that policymakers, that the government perhaps don't perhaps they don't have the access to that kind of information that you guys have. But do you think that there is this disconnect in understanding the sort of socio-cultural factors that perhaps drive these financial decisions that people make? And do you think that there needs to be a better understanding of this?
I think a lot of policies have always been crafted with, I suppose, traditional knowledge, where you sort of talk about multi-pillar retirement and things like that. But you're right, this now you need to embed these social and cultural factors into it. And so therefore, this is where it gets very tough from a policy-making perspective, because a one-size-fits-all doesn't work anymore. You've got to understand different societies, different cultural values. For example, in Malaysia, people still want to take care of their parents. I mean, literally in the house, whereas a lot of Western cultures, you now are sending parents to old folks' home. Here, it's still frowned upon. But it might be something we need to move towards, given the kind of sandwich generations we have. So it is difficult for policymakers to sort of now take into account all these things, which is why I think one of the things we've been looking a lot at is the need to do a lot more pilot testing. So once you do come up with recommendations, there is a need to sort of test these recommendations with small groups of people, run it out first, because you need to see the impact and how people will react to it. It's not as easy as, I know best, and now please everyone follow through, because of the social, economic changes, people's cultural preferences have to be imputed into it.
We've talked extensively about some of the issues that we face, the challenges that we will face in the next 2 decades. We also want to, of course, look at the solutions, what we can do to sort of curb some of these risks. But we do want to take another break. We'll take a quick breather, but when we return, we'll discuss on what we can do to better prepare for an aging society and what steps we can take to face some of these challenges. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in a minute.
Let's go.
So let me focus on the demographic changes. There are 2 important facts. First, our population is shrinking. And the second, our population aging is advancing. So now let me briefly talk about our shrinking populations. Currently, Japan's population is about 124 million. Actually, it's large. However, Japan's population has been declining over the time, and it is expected our population will be around 100 million by 2056. That means in the next 30 years, Japan will lose about 24 million people, which is large. And that is almost equivalent to the size of population of Australia or Taiwan. But the shrinking population will not stop there. It's continued decline. By 2070, our population will be around 87 million. That means compared to now, Japan will lose about 37 to 38 million people, which is almost equivalent to the population of Canada. So you can imagine that the impact is huge. At the meantime, population aging is advancing. As you know that Japan is the most aged society at this moment. If we look at the share of elderly person to the total economy, that is about 29%. But it will continue to increase. That will be around slightly less than 40% by 2070. So you can imagine that the combination of shrinking population and population aging will have a huge impact on both macroeconomics and also sustainability of the social security system and also public finances. Once population aged, the spending related to social security will increase, such as pensions, healthcare, and Medicare. On the other hand, the revenue side means that tax and the social security contribution, they basically depends on the size of working age population. And once population shrinks, we expect lower working age population. That means the combination of the shrinking population and the population aging increases the spending on one hand. On the other hand, we have less revenues. That impose serious fiscal challenges. And as a result, we will have like a government deficit. And indeed, in the last many years, Japanese government has been running a fiscal deficit. As a result, now the government debt is a huge amount. It's about 240% of the GDP, which is the highest in the world. So given this situation, Japanese government tried to address such a big issues, and the Japanese government implemented significant pension reforms in 2004, and a similar effort has been made in the healthcare and the long-term care fields. But still, we are facing many challenges. And let me turn to the labor market issues. So you may expect we have less labor forces because of shrinking population. And indeed, right, in the last 20 years ago, government and researcher expected our labor force would decline. But it turns out it is not the case. In the last 10 to 15 years, Japan's labor force did not decrease, rather increases. The why? There are two factors. One is we have more female labor supply. And also we have more elderly employment. So elderly persons' labor force participation rate increases. The reason is simple. There are a change in the policy. I mean, the employment rule changes. Specifically, Japanese government raises retirement ages and also expand the employment program. So these new measure or policy change encourage the more people continue to work beyond the age of 65.
Let's go.
Welcome back to the Insights with AKPK FEWRC. Previously, we've discussed the key challenges of an aging society, retirement savings, and the sort of fiscal pressures facing Malaysia. But now, we want to shift gears and talk about the solutions, because I think, Nati, we've given quite a sort of bleak outlook perhaps, but there are ways we can sort of curb some of these and put some measures in place. So overall, really, do you think with the existing tools that we have right now, are we prepared to face the realities of an aging society? And if not, what are the steps would you recommend to effectively address some of the, I guess, low-hanging fruits that we can start with to sort of address some of these concerns that we shared earlier?
I think first and foremost, I like to recognize a lot has already been done. We do have a lot of tools for retirement purposes, but I suppose the point is they need to be tweaked, as you mentioned. And why do they need to be tweaked? I talked a lot about it because the whole landscape is changing. A couple of years ago, you didn't have things called the gig economy. You now have to take that into account. You didn't have things called multi-stage life where people sort of move in and out of retirement, back to the workforce and things. So you've got to take those two into account. Also, I think a lot of policies need to be tweaked to take into account behavioral aspects, a bit of what I talked about Amy when I said you've got to think about her present biases, her choice overload, lottery effects. So these things have not been imbued into current policies. So I think one major step is to sort of start thinking about these things so that you have a more individual-centric approach to policy making. And so because of that, in our report, we looked at it from a personal perspective, and we said, if you want to build the right retirement ecosystem, you've got to sort of move away from a multi-pillar system, but into what we call an income elevation model. And this is where it speaks to the individual. First and foremost, you need to have this foundational level of savings, and that's your basic level of savings, where the savings is. So we like our acronyms, and we came up with the acronym called ASAS, where ASAS stands for the system, the whole way of how you save needs to be affordable. It needs to be simple so people know how to do it. It needs to be accessible. The funds have to be accessible, and it's stable.
Right.
So once you've got that foundational savings, then people will start saying, okay, when I retire, I know I have a basic amount. Then over and above that, we have what we say, you then need to talk about elevation, because not everyone's lifestyle, the basic saving is enough. They need the elevated. Elevated, we talk about rise. This is where you need to have risk diversification. So you're actually chasing high income growth through risk diversification, and you want sustainable wealth and enhancement. So we have the basic level, which is the foundational, and then you need to have what we call the top up or the elevated. And this is where we need a lot more retirement products. I think when you look at the basic level, you've got EPF and things like that. You now need to have a lot more retirement products to serve the elevated side. So you sort of complement your savings in EPF. And I think over and above that, once you've got your foundational, you've got your elevated savings, The problem also in Malaysia is we have so many different schemes out there. You've got EPF, you've got your ASBs, you've got all your private providers, you've got PRS. I think what is important is we need to leverage on technology so that the single person understands where all his monies are at. And this is what we talk about in terms of a single viewer platform. This is something Singapore has done. So when you sort of key in the Singaporean IC, he can see where all his funds are at in a single platform. And that's very important because, as I mentioned earlier, people will get too many choices, too many information, overload, then you get paralysis and you don't move at all. So I think this is something the government needs to think about. I know there are data issues because it's your sharing of data, but it's all your personal data actually. So what I want to be able to see is with a single click, I know where all my funds are and whether I put that aside for children's education or for my retirement or for my parents, at least it's all in a single view, and that's very important. So again here, understanding the individual's behavior, we have to have a solution that suits it. No one wants to have 5 different forms and looking at it and trying adding it up yourself. No, you're not going to do that. So this is where the government can also help with something like a single viewer platform. And I think retirement is an issue that needs to be handled across, it needs a whole of nation approach. It's not something that the government can solve by itself. It needs the private sector to come in and support themselves, and also civil society, because there's a whole need to change mindsets, build up your financial planning knowledge. So it needs everyone to sort of work together. It's a big issue and we all need to come together to look at it. And so ICMR's report has sort of highlighted a couple of solutions. As I mentioned earlier, the income elevation model, the single viewer platform, and things like that. So that's something that needs to be thought about. The other thing that I think our report sort of also focuses on is the need to spur the silver economy. I mentioned it earlier that, you know, apart from challenges that comes across from the demographic shift, we also have opportunities. And the opportunities is really in that silver economy, so that we provide, I suppose, the healthcare services that are affordable and accessible to the nation. Now, at the moment, we have many companies who are sort of moving into it. We've got retirement homes building up slowly. We've got concierge services, but a lot of these companies are still at very small stages. So I think this is the role of where capital markets can come in to be the funding escalator. So private markets, because they've got greater risk appetite, can help fund these kind of endeavors to scale them up, because what's important is we need them to be scaled and also work together so that you have like a single platform to provide you all sorts of services that you need. A simple example is if you've got to take your parents to hospital, you will realize how difficult it is. First, you've got to sort of put them at the lobby while you go and park your car somewhere, and then you worry that they get worried because you're going to take a long time parking. And then later, you've got to take them to 1 or 2 doctors. You'll be rushing in and out. So these kind of services to help you facilitate this is important. There are people who are doing it, but as I said, they're still small, and this is where private capital needs to be pumped in to build it up. At the Securities Commission, they've put up a framework for equity crowdfunding, and what I would like to also highlight is that 2 of these companies have actually used the crowdfunding platforms to scale up their operations. So what we would like to see is a lot more, so that we can sort of build this ecosystem to support the silver economy. That's a great opportunity for Malaysia.
You mentioned a lot of really interesting points there. I mean, it's really a whole of society approach, isn't it? It takes a village to really prepare ourselves. But talking about the silver economy, what are perhaps some examples out there that we can look to in trying to achieve this silver economy? Is this what Japan is doing?
I think everyone's doing it at different ways in different places. For Malaysia, I think we have started on a very good course, as I talked about, equity crowdfunding to help scale up. I think it's a retirement home called Suka that's sort of done it, a concierge service called Orita, which is helping people to manage these things. So what I would like to see is a lot more of this funding, be it from venture capital or equity crowdfunding, to sort of push this along. And what is interesting is this is where, if you know that one day you may want to move into a retirement home, given the changes in the family structure, you can be an investor today, a young investor today who's already investing for something that you may move into later on. So I think these kind of venues need to be propped up even more so that we can help bring that kind of changes that we need to service the silver economy.
You stress a lot about how policies, how measures should be a lot more contextualized, should understand on the individual, on the family level, what's actually happening, the socio-cultural context, right? It's very important. Like parking the car at a hospital, like you wouldn't
Simple
think,
things, yes.
people actually think of these issues, but when it comes to us, it is actually such a major barrier, right? And then to add on top of that, we have, as you said, the gig economy, the nature of work changing. I'm a gig worker myself, and I'm just like Amy. I don't think of my retirement. And we have fluid employment patterns and with various saving mechanisms. So what do you think are some policies or some programs that Malaysia should prioritize to support some of these financial security, specifically for new, or I guess fluid employment patterns of retirees in this sector?
I think the gig economy is a big segment now of the Malaysian workforce, and we don't realize that, and it's only going to get bigger. Gig economy is not just your Grab workers. Anybody who's on contract and things like that will be a gig worker. And I think that's important because with, again, the sandwich generation, people are looking for more work-life balance. So you tend to not want to go back to a 9-to-5 job. You want to have that flexibility. So you will fall into this whole category called gig economy. Unfortunately, currently, the gig economy is not legislated. You don't have a legislation covering gig workers. You're outside the realm of formal employment. So I think that's one major thing that needs to be done. There must be some legislation to recognize gig workers a lot better. And then after that, I think financial literacy awareness. I think we need to sort of put in place many programs to sort of get people to understand how savings works, especially when you don't have a fixed income. Those with salaries, it's very easy. You know, every month you're going to get X amount, and therefore I put aside 10%, whatever it is. But when your income fluctuates, it's very important for you to sort of think, how do I do that with fluctuating income? But normally some expenses are fixed. So how do I manage my savings? So this is where financial literacy programs are critical. Over and above that, I've always believed that, well, I like to call it an adult starter pack, which is a bit of a strange thing, but at 18, when you change your IC, because you now can vote, I think it's also important that you now get your income tax number and straight away an EPF account number. Why is that? So that I'm telling you, as an adult, you have to start thinking about these responsibilities, paying your taxes, as well as thinking about your retirement. No 18-year-old will voluntarily think about it, but I think this is a nudge to start people thinking in that sense. But of course, with the digital world, if I just give you the starter pack, nothing's going to happen. I think we need the digital tools and nudges. So this is where, for example, most of us would use apps for Grab. So maybe instead of, if the Grab is 15 ringgit, you add another 2 ringgit that goes straight into your EPF account. So it's these rounding off micro savings, and then you don't feel it so much. Because if I tell you every month you have to put aside 100, it's like a bit daunting. But if it's when you're buying your coffee or taking your Grab or any small amount, it does add up. So I think this is where, and we are at a stage where technology is so cheap already for us to be able to do these things. So I think from a gig perspective, or even beyond that, financial literacy, the adult starter pack, and then the digital tools and nudges to move people in that direction.
Really interesting points there. But I want to go back to the earlier point you made about this whole of society approach, right? About government, private sector, private equity, civil society, oil, all sort of joining forces to prepare better for what's to come. I guess, just to be a devil's advocate for the sake of argument, right? I guess some could argue that civil society plays this role in filling in the gap of what's missing, what's lacking from government, from the market. How do you see these three different sort of entities, the government, the private sector, and the civil society, collaborating seamlessly and instead of working in silo, all really to address the same issue, isn't it?
I think that's a very good point, and I think that's what's needed. Currently, everyone works in their own areas. So the government would think of government policies, but sometimes maybe in isolation. This is where I think the role of civil society becomes more important. Their voice needs to be put out there a lot more because they know the on-the-ground issues. And so if they can voice that out, and then the government can sort of say, oh, I see where you're coming from, and that blending. And then the private sector must come in. Private sector will come in when they see, oh, there's an opportunity. So I think that's how we bring the three of them together. But it's like you said, it's not an easy task, but it is an important task, because until all three work together, we won't be able to address this big issue that's facing us.
You talk a lot about this sort of mindset shift, right? And we address some of the more individual challenges that people face in saving, spending habits, but at the root of it, it's really a systemic issue, right? So this mindset shift, I guess, is not just at the societal level, but among policymakers, among academics and researchers. Do you think that there is this understanding of this sort of balancing between how much the system can actually address these issues, and to what extent individuals can prepare or fix their sort of individual habits in terms of spending, in saving? Because in our first episode, really, we talked to Assistant Governor Tuan Abu, and he talked a little bit about some of the blame game, the shaming that comes with individual habits, right? But at the root of it, there's also a lot of systemic issues. So how do you, I guess, suggest we balance between, not just blaming individuals, but also understanding the really socio-cultural, the economic, the systemic issues that come with these individual decisions?
It's very tough to sort of balance these two things. But I think the first thing you must move away is the blame game. It's no point sort of beating someone up and saying, why didn't you get it? You need to save a lot for retirement, if they just don't get it. Because of present bias. It's not because they don't want to, but because there are other things, and your mind can only take so much in a day. So you have to understand where they come from, and I think once you do, then it makes it easier for government to sort of make policies. But that doesn't mean that everything shifts to the government, and I think that's the other thing, which is why I think you also have to realize that at the end of the day, you have to be responsible for your own savings and your own retirement. At the end of the day, government is just there to assist, especially those who may be in a more difficult or vulnerable position to do so. But you can't sort of lump everything to government. So getting that balance is not easy, but it's something we will have to work towards, I think.
All right. Thank you so much. I think plenty more we could discuss, really, but that is the time that we have today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
For joining us on The Insights, and of course for sharing some of your expertise and insights today, a lot of the incredible research and findings that you have. It's been really enlightening to explore some of these trends in Malaysia's aging, demographic changes, the challenges of an aging society, and what are the steps that we can take to build a more sustainable retirement mindset. And of course, thank you to our audience, our listeners, for tuning in. We hope this discussion has given you a greater understanding of the evolving landscape of retirement planning and the sort of importance of preparing for a multi-stage life. And of course, remember, it's never too early or too late to start thinking about your financial future. That's a good reminder for myself as well, and to all the Amy's out there. Stay informed and of course stay financially savvy, and we'll see you next time on The Insights.